Okay, so welcome again to the November session of BusinessWise Insiders. In a moment, I'll start walking through the presentation. And just to manage your expectations, it'll run for maybe 25, 30 minutes, after which we'll break into, as I just mentioned, a discussion group where you'll get the chance to introduce yourself and ask questions, and hopefully share ideas about today's topic or whatever else is on your mind. As always, I'm just going to ask people to keep themselves on mute during the presentation portion of today's session. But if you have questions, you can either ask them in the chat window or save them for the breakout discussion later. So today we're going to dig into a question that I'm sure has crossed your mind once or twice over the past couple of years or so, since ChatGPT came on the scene in November 2022. And that is, can generative AI tools like ChatGPT help you write your B2B emails? I'm not expecting we're going to get to a definitive answer to this question because there really isn't one. AI technology continues to evolve extremely rapidly, and the output depends a lot on the input and on the user's expectations. And I already know from experience that generative AI can absolutely help with certain aspects of the writing and creative process. But our goal today is a little bit different. What I want to do is use ChatGPT to examine the key elements of email prospecting and see where AI can help or where it falls short, in order to identify how we as human sales reps should be thinking about our approach to lead generation in a world where AI will increasingly become a fixture. So to start the presentation, I want to bring you back to where I was when I started thinking about today's session and how to approach it. I figured if we're going to be talking about whether ChatGPT can write an effective B2B email, then I should give ChatGPT a chance to write the invitation to the session. Now, as I'm sure many of you already know, the art of crafting a prompt that you can feed into a generative AI tool is a really important part of the process. The quality and precision of what ChatGPT writes can vary widely depending on the prompt that you provide. On one hand, you want to provide as many specific details as are necessary to achieve the tone and substance that you're looking for. But on the other hand, too many rules and details can end up bogging the technology down as it tries to sort of follow too many pieces of guidance. So you can see here what I used as a prompt for ChatGPT in writing this month's Insider's invitation. I obviously wanted to be clear that I wanted an invitation to a B2B sales webinar and for it to be about this central topic. But I also wanted the invitation to embody some of the tensions that we'll be talking about today, which as an introduction which as an instruction is a little bit more sophisticated. So you can see here, I asked it to write an invitation. Then at the end, you can see I said the invitation itself should be illustrative of some of the pros and cons of using AI-generated content in B2B sales prospecting. And here is what ChatGPT came up with. Now, this isn't the exact invitation that you all received. I tweaked it slightly to ensure that it was in the right format for our typical Insiders invitations, but it's pretty close to what you got. And substantively, I wanted the invitation to come almost entirely from what ChatGPT wrote. And I have to say, it did a pretty good job. Not surprisingly, everything is clear and grammatically correct. More importantly, right off the bat, the invitation gets to the central question that I wanted to cover and offers a few bullet points that sum up the pros and cons of using AI in B2B outreach. And finally, it included a paragraph mentioning that the email was written by ChatGPT and asks readers to reflect on whether it did the job well or lacked a personal feel. However, I don't think we can declare the debate over just based on this exercise, because this kind of email, which is a fairly straightforward and impersonal event invitation, is not representative of the kinds of email lead gen that most sales reps use to engage with their prospects. And here's a key distinction that I think we all need to keep in mind as we think about whether and how AI can help sales reps set more appointments with prospects. So in the world of B2B sales, there are really two main categories of email lead gen. There's email marketing, which is more of an advertisement for your company or brand, and it's geared towards specific kinds of content or events frequently. And our Insider's invitation sort of falls into this category. We are writing to advertise or notify you about a specific event, and not necessarily to engage for a first-time appointment about our product or service. And then on the other side of the ledger, there's email prospecting, which is where sales reps are seeking to make those one-on-one connections and set first-time appointments with prospects. And that's a totally different ballgame. And since the vast majority of we as sales reps are engaged to a far greater degree in the latter, in email prospecting, that's where our focus will be today. Whether and how ChatGPT can help you write effective prospecting emails where you're trying to make that human connection and start conversations. But before we do that, we need to take yet another step back. Previous Insiders attendees have heard us talk a lot about the 40-40-20 rule. We talk about it in relation to all aspects of sales and lead generation, and it helps us stay focused on what the big picture and what the main driving forces in lead gen success are. And it's the idea that the vast majority of your lead gen success comes from two basic concepts: your list, the prospects you're reaching out to, and your offer, the value that you provide either in the form of your product or service, or more likely in the context of that first appointment, whether or not your prospect becomes a client. It's what gives your prospect a reason to act on your offer. Now, the other 20% on the right, what you say and how you say it, that is where your email message lives. The 20% that covers the words you use and how you present the offer you're making to your prospect. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And this is a point I'll attempt to make throughout this presentation. Whether or not ChatGPT can help you write effective email prospecting messages, the fundamentals of successful business development have not changed, and we can't ignore the two 40% buckets on the left. And neither have the key elements of successful email prospecting changed. Whether the words come from your own brain or from a generative AI tool like ChatGPT, for your emails to start conversations with your prospects, they need to be clear, they need to get to the point, they need to sound human, and they need to offer value. And before we see whether ChatGPT can make the grade in each of these areas, I want to note one key difference between the way we approached this topic last year in September of 2023 and how we're going to look at it this year over a year later. For the Insiders presentation from last September, I was using the standard version of ChatGPT, which is kind of a default blank slate. It's been trained on a vast amount of data, obviously, but it's not necessarily starting from the position of knowing what we're looking for in terms of effective email prospecting. So this year I created my own custom GPT and fed it a version of the instructions that you see on this slide. The instructions are a little more detailed than what you see here, but the goal is the same: to be clear, to get to the point, to be human, and to offer value. In a moment, we're going to look at some specific examples, but before we do that, Deborah, did you have anything you wanted to add by way of sort of introduction to the topic?
The main thing would be that while I'm not a prophet and I don't know what new business development will be like in 5, 10, or 20 years, what I do know is that today that human element is critical when you're trying to develop new business and get that first time appointment with someone that doesn't know you or what you have to offer.
Yeah, that's really critical. Obviously, we're talking about trying to get the GPT to create a message that sounds human, but I hope as we walk through these examples, you'll see how much human effort went into helping GPT craft the responses and determining whether they will lead to success in terms of prospecting, and that then there's so much more to the process that requires your own human experience, insight, and ingenuity. But with that, let's get started. All right, so as we begin to take a look at how ChatGPT stacks up, we're going to start with probably the most straightforward and basic principle of effective email prospecting, and that's the importance of writing clearly. Given the importance of standing out in the inbox, there's a strong temptation to be clever, creative, and even gimmicky when it comes to email prospecting. But at BusinessWise, we're strong believers in the power and importance of clarity. And here's why. You're a sales rep reaching out to a prospect early in the process. They're not expecting your email. They may not even know about your company. They don't need to introduce any, you don't need to introduce any additional friction into that equation. If your prospect has to work to understand your email, you've lost them before you started. So you need to be as clear as possible. And that means eliminating business jargon and cliches. Your prospects may not know your buzzwords, but they know plain regular English, and that's what you should use. And finally, your goal is to get your prospect to act on your email. And the clearer you are, the more likely your message will be understood and will resonate with your prospect. So let's put that all into ChatGPT and see what happens. Now, for each of the prompts I'll be using in today's session, I've attempted to select a particular B2B sector that's representative in some way. So here it's a commercial HVAC company, but the example might apply to other building services like janitorial, security, building automation, etc. And even though I've already primed the GPT to write clear messages, I'm going to add a prompt to emphasize that particular characteristic. So in this case, clarity. So specifically, I told it to prioritize clarity, to reduce friction, avoid jargon, and strike a nerve to generate a reply. It's the same 3 bullet points from the last slide. And here's what ChatGPT came up with. So I'm going to leave this on the screen and break it down a little bit over the next few slides. So feel free to read through it at your own pace and see what you think. But my first reaction is that this is not great, but also not bad. Last year, when I tried this experiment with the default version of a ChatGPT, its first attempt was much longer, almost twice as long. And as we'll discuss in the next section, length is often the enemy of clarity. But here we have an email that's certainly not egregiously long. It's probably in line with the length of many prospecting emails that you receive today. And to be fair, I did not emphasize to ChatGPT that it should keep the message particularly short. So let's look at how well it performed on the tasks that I assigned it. So here in the highlighted sections, it actually does a pretty good job of asking clear questions, stating the kinds of services that this company provides to its customers, and proposing a clear next step. So it starts out with a question, asking when's the last time you got your HVAC checked. Later down in the message, if you're not sure about the current state of your system, a quick check could be a smart step. Talks a little bit about what makes the company different and better. And then it asks, would it be helpful to set up a brief call this week? So pretty clear and to the point about who's writing and what they're asking for. Now, I already talked about the length, but if I'm putting on my editor hat, I wanted to point it out a couple of other aspects that stood out to me. So as you can see, the email kind of alternates between first person references like we and our team, and more directly addressing the prospect's perspective, when really the emphasis should be on the latter. The more effective email prospecting messages are the ones that talk about whatever issue you address from your prospect's perspective. So writing from that second person can put yourself in your prospect's shoes and make you think more about how they think about whatever issue you're writing. And then as far as clarity goes, there's one really important section here in the middle that I think gets a little bit wonky, using stilted phrases like uninterrupted operation and proactive high-touch service. When we use terms like that, we couch our message in jargon and remove it of any real meaning, which is obviously not our goal when we talk about being clear. So what grade does ChatGPT get for clarity? So I'm going to give it a solid B. Last year, I was maybe wavering. I thought it didn't do quite as well, but I think this is a solid B because I think it was largely easy to understand. So there wasn't a whole lot of friction, and it clearly highlighted core products and services. It mostly avoided complicated jargon, but it did use some buzzwords and cliches that lack real substance. And then it was relevant. ChatGPT started with a direct question and ended with a clear call to action, even though it did slide into the first person framing a few times. Deborah, what did you think of this first exercise?
I agree with you generally, Sam. One of the things I would point out, you said earlier that you don't want to make your prospect work. And that second paragraph is too long, and some of the sentences have too many words. And I think that turns off people from getting through that weighty paragraph. So I would
Right.
definitely split it in two and make those sentences that have more than, 10, 12 words shorter.
Right. And I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the next section, ChatGPT is trying to do what you're asking of it. And sometimes what you ask of it is sort of contradictory, self-contradictory, and talk a little bit more about that. But in this case, it tried to jam a lot of things into a short space, and in doing so, made the prospect's job a little bit harder. Okay, so let's move on to the next assignment. So up to now, we've talked about the importance of clarity in reducing friction and compelling action. But in the previous example, length was more of a problem and some density in that second paragraph. So now let's ask, can ChatGPT get to the point a little bit quicker? So for a lot of the same reasons we've already discussed, being concise in your prospecting emails is really critical. So once again, it reduces friction by reducing the number of unnecessary words. That's the issue Deb just pointed out. That also has the effect of increasing clarity by making your message easier to read and your point easier to understand. And when you make that little extra effort to get right to the point, to tell your prospect why you're emailing and what you want them to do, you increase the odds that they'll take the action. So here's our prompt, this time using a fictional employee benefits and outsourced HR company in Charlotte. Again, I'm being explicit about the top line priority, as well as the specific goals I'm trying to achieve. Reducing friction, increasing clarity, and encouraging action. And this time, as a guardrail, I'm just going to add a line at the end to ensure some level of conciseness by keeping the message to 150 words or less. And here's ChatGPT's response. So at first glance, this is pretty concise. It's barely 100 words. So that's a good start. In the previous section, actually, our message was only about 125 words. This is 20% shorter, so it does a little bit better job. Compared to the emails that we looked at last year, both of these examples have been a lot shorter. So priming the GPT to write shorter messages to prioritize clarity has clearly worked. All in all, ChatGPT is doing a great job when it comes to just the top line goal of being concise. Let's dig in a little bit. So the highlighted areas here are where I think it does a good job of getting to the point. So right at the beginning, it dives into a challenge that the prospect might be facing. That's what I talked about in the first section, writing about this issue from the prospect's perspective. Again, it sums up what the company offers, HR and benefit solutions that free up your team while cutting costs. And then at the end, it's clear about its offer of a quick phone call and about the action it wants the prospect to take. So all these are benefits on sort of the clarity aspect that result from asking it to be more concise and to get to the point. As far as where it fell short, I think it fell victim to a common human mistake, and this is something I alluded to in the previous section, when it comes to brevity in email prospecting, which is you try to cram too much information into a limited amount of space at the expense of clarity. So when we talk about being concise, we're not talking about saying just as much in a smaller, in fewer words. We're talking about removing unnecessary things, focusing on one or two aspects rather than 9 or 10 in order to make your message resonate more with prospects. Now, to be clear, the phrases highlighted in blue aren't terrible by any means. They're just a little bit overwrought and might require some parsing on the part of the prospect to unpack, which is not something we want to be asking of our email prospects. Again, the point of brevity, of being concise, is precisely to avoid making the prospect have to work to understand what we're saying. So while ChatGPT succeeded in being concise, it sort of missed the point by packing too much into the limited spaces that we allotted it. And you can see that if we make a couple small edits, so you see I've cut out a few words between slides here, you really start to get somewhere in terms of getting to the point. Now, there are a lot of things missing from this message that could make it stronger, and we'll get to those later in the presentation, but hopefully you can see that brevity is a really critical piece of the puzzle when it comes to reducing friction, increasing clarity, and maximizing the odds of prospect action. And just to be clear, all I did here was delete the blue section in the second paragraph and slightly revise the blue section in the first paragraph. And you can see it's a much shorter message that really hits on the 1 or 2 points that we want the prospect to be thinking about. And since ChatGPT's output was concise and pretty close to a usable message, I'm going to give it another solid B on getting to the point. It did get to the point despite using a few areas of stilted, dense language that added some friction. It was largely easy to understand, and it effectively highlighted those core products and services. And it was clear about the offer and next step. Deb, do you agree or have any additional insights?
I agree, Sam, and I just want people to notice that in your changed version, there's just more white space, and it makes reading easier.
Okay, so now we're going to ramp up the difficulty a little bit and see if ChatGPT can take it to the next level. Being clear and concise are key principles of good writing, but the most successful prospectors don't stop there. They create opportunities for engagement by forging those human connections. This is a huge difference maker in email prospecting in particular, where so many emails sound like they lack that human touch and end up getting deleted before anyone reads them because you're assuming it's coming from a marketer or maybe even a generative AI chatbot. So it's pretty simple. When your prospects feel like there's a real person on the other side, they're going to be more likely to respond and engage. As I just mentioned, human-sounding emails stand out in the inbox. That's otherwise full of sort of robotic marketing emails. And since your goal is to start a conversation with another human, your email will be more successful if it sounds like it's part of that conversation, written in the way that humans converse, as opposed to being overly formal or full of jargon. In some ways, it's sort of jarring to get an email that sounds like it's from a marketer, and then you respond, and then there's an actual human on the other end. It feels disjointed. So in essence, it just needs to feel real and authentic, like there might actually be a human sales rep on the other end that your prospect might benefit from engaging with. So here's our prompt. So the top line goal is to sound as much as a human, much like a human as possible. And the specific instructions are to avoid marketing speak, to use friendly conversational language, and to create the impression that there's a real person on the other end. And here the fictional company is an outsourced IT firm in Fort Worth. So here's what ChatGPT came up with. Now, as you can see, some of the ways it really tried to follow my prompt. The highlighted areas here appear to be attempts at being friendly, conversational, and human. And actually, I think this is really good. It's worth noting that when we performed this experiment last year, it was clear that ChatGPT was trying to sound human, but that it was frequently just a little bit off. It was almost like somebody pretending to try to be human rather than sounding like a real person on the other end. And this represents a big improvement. And you can see some of the ways it did it were by using casual language, like hop on a call, but it also just approached it like a human would. I talk with business owners around Fort Worth, and these are the complaints I hear. And then very simply describing what this business does. We're not about flashy tools. We're here to make IT work for your team at your pace. So I think this is a really solid effort. And interesting, where ChatGPT came up short in terms of clarity, when I asked it to be concise, here it does a much better job in that regard, which you can see in these blue highlighted sections. So rather than having overwrought language and using business jargon, it talks about unexpected downtime, rising costs, and patchy support. Pretty easy to understand. Second paragraph, it says we're a local team trying to give clients a more seamless IT experience, making tech reliable, predictable, and aligned with what you need day to day. Again, pretty to the point and clear. And then at the end, it asks, can we help find a better way to support your growth, which is really what this is all about. Prospects don't care about how their computers work outside of the context of their growing business. So it focuses on that top line goal. And this shouldn't be all that surprising, because when you speak plainly, and clearly when we tell the ChatGPT to speak plainly, conversing like an actual human rather than trying to sound like a website or a brochure, your message becomes more clear, more authentic, and hopefully more resonant. But since this one is subjective, I'm not going to give it a definitive grade. I thought it did pretty well, but I'm going to leave it up to you all to decide what you think. As I mentioned, my reaction is that it did a pretty good job at being different. It used casual language that felt more like a human and less brochure-like. It was conversational. The tone was clearly more human-like than what we'd seen in the previous examples or what we saw last year. And then, of course, the subjective piece is, did it feel real? So do you think that ChatGPT's message gave the impression that there was a real person on the other end? What did you think, Deb?
I thought it was pretty good too. I don't like those thick, long paragraphs. I would just split them in two. But I liked the hop on a call. What I thought was very human.
And it's just so interesting that, you tell it to write clearly or you tell it to be concise and it falls into these, sort of stilted sounding phrases. You tell it to sound like a human, and that's where it really makes that critical adjustment. And that should say something to everybody when they sit down to write their emails. Think about writing like a human rather than any other sort of abstract metric, because if you write like a human, if you write like you talk, people are going to treat you like you're a human. Okay, so for our final task, we're going to turn to the bread and butter of sales prospecting, because it's not enough to be clear, concise, or even to sound human if what you're offering doesn't provide any benefit to your prospect in the moment. Now, remember, this is cold outreach to new prospects. They're very likely not thinking about buying anything, and they may not even know that they have a problem that they need help with. And that means you shouldn't be looking to close any deals at this point. Your singular goal is to start a conversation that leads to an appointment. And in order to get your prospect to give you the answer you're looking for, you need to give them something in return. This is something we call the cold email contract. Every email exchange is a transaction. Your prospect needs a reason to act. So you have the owl on the top saying, if I offer my prospect something that helps them address their problems and priorities, and the prospect says, I'll have a reason to reply, call, or click. It's that simple. It's an exchange, something in return for something else. And here are a few tips just to ensure that you're offering value to your prospect. First, again, it's not about you, it's about your prospect. Always frame your offer or request in terms of how your prospect stands to benefit from it. Second, think about the insights and ideas you can offer rather than the products or services that you provide. So what do you know that your prospect doesn't? How can you help address their problems and priorities? And then finally, in the context of setting an appointment, these insights and ideas are free. There are no strings attached. So a really helpful frame is to ask yourself, what does your prospect get from a meeting with you, even if they never become a client? Because if they don't get that value up front, there's no reason for them to meet. So here's our final prompt. And I used a B2B lead generation firm like BusinessWise as the fictional seller here. And the priority is to offer insights and value. So the message should be framed in terms, again, of how the prospect benefits. It should focus on their problems and priorities. And it should provide a reason to meet, even if it never goes any further. And this is a really critical piece of it. And we queued ChatGPT. And before we even get into specifics, you can see that the resulting email is very long. And that's a bad sign. And honestly, even with all those words and bullets, there's not much here in terms of any great insights or even the offer of insights in a future conversation. So the highlighted areas here are really all I can see that even hint at a unique perspective. And it's not much. It's sort of more of the same. If you had this problem, would you be interested in a solution? Talking about what we offer in sort of an esoteric and jargony way. And at the bottom here, you see if your team is experiencing challenges with prospecting or would value a fresh perspective on effective lead generation. I mean, that sounds good, but there's no substance there, and certainly not enough to make me want to respond or take a meeting with this person. And while the message does start out by highlighting a challenge that the prospect might be facing, the email is really stuck in the seller's perspective. Again, you can see all the instances of we and us and our firm and our team, when the focus should be on you, the prospect. Even the value it's attempting to offer is all about the product and its features. It's not about the value the prospect gets from meeting with you, even if they never become a client, which is what we explicitly asked it to do. And honestly, I would be much more likely to respond to the message from the previous section where we prompted the ChatGPT to write like a human than I would to this sort of overworked, too busy, too detailed, too I-focused attempt. So as a result, this one is an F for me. It really shows why unique human insights will continue to be a major difference maker for successful sales prospectors in the world of generative AI. And that, we've talked about how that's true in the context of the holistic sales process, but it's obviously also true in the context of just writing your email. ChatGPT did not have insights and ideas, didn't even really know how to present it as an, a value proposition just for the act of responding to the email or setting an appointment. And just a few key points from a perspective. GPT highlighted a prospecting challenge but remains stuck in the seller's perspective. Didn't offer any new insights that might be relevant to the prospect's problems and priorities. It's really critical to try to change the prospect's perspective to give them ideas that make them think about the problem in a new way. It did not do that. And then most critically, it just failed to give the prospect a reason to act, whether to reply or to meet as a chance for the sales rep. It framed it more as sort of something that the sales rep is getting rather than what the prospect is getting. Deb, I assume you agree, but any additional thoughts or insights?
I do agree. And I would go back to thinking about the 40-40-20 rule, which was actually written by Bob Stone in the 50s that had to do with direct mail. And the point being that if we assume that ChatGPT can do a good job with that last 20%, that our efforts should be spent on honing the right list and coming up with the right offer.
So to wrap up, and before we start the breakout discussion, I just wanted to run through a few questions that I think would be helpful for you to be thinking about, both in the discussion and following our session today. Some of them will get at your own experiences using generative AI and whether you think it helps, hurts, or makes no difference to what you're trying to achieve. So that's on the left. Have you used it? How has it helped? How has it hurt? And then on the right side of the slide are some questions that encourage you to take a step back and look at your approach to business development sort of from a 30,000-foot perspective. Do you have a compelling offer and a focused list, like Deb just mentioned, to provide the foundation for successful lead gen that we talked about earlier in the presentation? Again, think about your own unique insights and ideas and how you can use them to give prospects a reason to engage and meet with you. The exercise we ran through today with ChatGPT shows only one sliver of what generative AI tools can do, and I hope you take away from the presentation that it has both strengths and weaknesses. Like all technology, it has some real promise, but only in the hands of sales teams and human beings that have a strong new business development process that relies, again, on providing value to the prospect in the form of those unique human insights and ideas. And then the only other question that I would encourage you to think about, it's not on the slide, is, throughout this presentation, throughout this exercise, how much human effort in prompting, priming, analyzing, editing went into just this exercise of seeing if ChatGPT could write a good email. So even in this context, again, the importance of human insights is pretty paramount. And I think we should all think about, how much effort is it worth to put into having an AI generative chatbot write your messages, or is this something we should just rely on our own brains mostly to do? Because I think that's a key question and I think can put you in the right spot ultimately. So there's a lot of food for thought for the discussion. And with that, thanks again. And I hope you stick around for the discussion.